Well, welcome back. I hope you were well. Let us begin today's session without any further delays. Um, I would like to start by saying I'll try to keep this session brief. There are three key aspects of today's conversation that I would want you to bookmark as I go into each and every one of them. The first is price. Your price. Connected to price is value. So I'm going to talk about the price value relationships and interconnectivity. The second is your ranking or ranking generally. And that has to do with where you and I rank in a marketplace. The third and the final will be presence. Your presence. I should say, before we start with the first, I'm still on what I think is the 8th series, which began a week plus ago, where I posed a question. The question was a simple one. Were you prepared? Were you equipped with the necessary skills, attitude, information, knowledge, gifts, inheritance for a successful relationship? Now we are still under the same theme. Today's session, however, let me start very quickly and I'll go right into the crux of why most people fail in relationships. I will try to address this more to women because I think they stand more to benefit. I haven't dated a man ever, so I really can't give you game or good knowledge with regards to men, generally speaking, i.e. speaking to men from a man's, as though I understood what it felt like to date men. In any case, from a young age, men have a sense of awareness of what it takes and what is required to attract a woman. Now, some of us do it very poorly. Some people do it much better. Some people were gifted with being around a family, a large family, and therefore knowing how to interact. You see, your family is the first gift to you on preparing for what the world will give to you in the future. Most families, if you go back to how things were in the past, you would have at least 2-3 children, and therefore you have siblings to play with, practice with, develop your social cues, develop your social mores, develop the ability to negotiate, learn how to fight peaceably, learn how to reconcile. That started in the family. Your peer group, mum and dad could have told you as much as they thought was necessary, but they had to step back and let you mingle and associate with the rest of your siblings. Mum and dad sometimes will restrain themselves and let and watch you negotiate with your brothers or your sisters or both in a peaceable way. That was the first, effectively, development ground. Done properly, and assuming you were not the only child, certainly, and not the last child, and also assuming the age gap between the siblings was within 1 to 2, sometimes 3 years maximum, you would find and see that most people in that controlled environment that I have just described were socialized. Boys therefore go through life with an understanding of the concept of what they need to become and who they need to be able to attract a woman. And as they go through life and as they grow into manhood, they also learn that attraction and retention are not synonymous terms. We need to learn what it takes to attract you. But more importantly, as we transition through life, we need to also be aware of what we need to retain you. Now, I use the word retain from a man's perspective in this instance, although the onus is on the woman with regards to relationships. Now, the point of the two words was to indicate, in the early stages of interacting with the opposite sex, in this example, attraction is what matters. Men are looking to ensure that they are attractive. In the latter stages of a relationship, retention is more important. Women need to have the skills to be able to retain the man who they chose and who was attracted to them. Now, this brings me to the concept of price. Now, many of you may not be aware of the 1999 and the dot-com crisis. Many people may not be familiar with the stock market and what happened both in the stock market and the bond market, but particularly the stock market. Technology stocks were overvalued. You could come up with a new company, and just by using the name .com, investors were throwing money at you, hoping that you would be the next big thing. Companies were being valued at eyeballs, number of searches, visitors per day. These companies had no revenue, absolutely no revenue. The savvy investors, however, could see that this was all some huge Ponzi scheme, and that this was almost a fad. Fear of missing out caused a lot of people to pump so much money into worthless companies and stocks because they were worried about missing out. We had a bubble. We know how it ended. Over the long term, a company, the stock, can only be valued based on the value of the cash flow the company will produce over its entire lifetime. And if a company cannot produce cash flow, positive cash flow, then it's worth nothing. It has to be able to produce a net positive cash flow over its entire lifetime in order to have a net present value that is positive. 2008, we saw something slightly the same. Real estate was pumped in the UK in 2006, 2007, and then we had the crash. And again, properties fell back to their original and realistic market price and value. In 2021, 2022, we saw the same thing. And why am I giving you these analogies? I'm giving you these analogies to set the scene for the concept of price. Price is what you pay. Value is what you get. In relationships, men, generally speaking, over their entire life, are well priced. Now, what this means is that at a young age, a man has youth, he has potential, he has sometimes ambition, but he has no experience. He has no resources because he hasn't gone out to the world and made something of himself. So, as a man gets older, he acquires knowledge and gains wisdom, and therefore opportunities to apply said wisdom. And if he does so with constant, continuous growth and improvement, a time comes where he gets feedback. He corrects his actions and his behaviors, and therefore gives the market what the market wants. If he is successful, he gets resources in exchange for the value he brings to the marketplace. So, from a young age, if you meet a boy who is 17 or 16, his value to the marketplace is very low. But he understands that it will not stay low providing he does what is needed. At 27, 10 years, 11 years later, his value is much higher. He's had the opportunity to work hard, sacrifice, discipline himself, and therefore serve the market with his gifts, skills, and talents. A man's value, therefore, is earned over time, and his price in the marketplace matches that value. It tracks his value. Progressive increase. Now, providing you did not inherit the wealth. So, at 23, most young men, if they sat next to a 45-year-old man, you see and you sense a level of humility in being in the presence of a much older man, because they understand that the 45-year-old man's value is much higher than theirs, all things remaining equal. But just based on age alone and experience, and therefore hard work, if you assumed the same level of discipline, the same level of hard work, the same level of persistence, the person who's done it longer will have more to show for it. So amongst men, there is almost a stoicism and a humility about what a man's value is, and therefore what his price is. You do not get the same with women. Society expects much less from women. A woman's value begins like a bull market, a bubble economy. From 18, between 18 and 23, generally speaking, that is the peak of a woman's beauty, fertility, chastity, all things remaining equal, and therefore what men desire. Her attractiveness is at the peak, at the very early stages, once she has turned into an adult. Now, she's done nothing to have earned that level of attention. In my world, a man who has £2 million has a certain value. But a woman who is 20 and who is perhaps a very attractive woman, we would consider her more valuable than the man who has £2 million in terms of equal exchange. Why? Because she has, in this instance, we'll assume she's a virgin, she has purity, she has beauty, and she has the youth. Her reproductive fertility value is the highest. Her sexual marketplace value is the highest. And if she's been trained and raised properly in a good home, her non-sexual marketplace value, meaning attitude, mannerisms, etiquette, decorum, behavior, she has just left home. And therefore, all of the things that were given to her as a gift from her father and her mother and her parents and the community are still intact. She hasn't been adulterated by the modern world, and it hasn't been diluted. Her core value system from a familial perspective is still intact. So, a woman's value, and therefore price, is much higher. To a man, he considers her at that age to be of the most highest value. Hence the term, a virgin's price. The men will go across the seas. Think about the movie Troy. Two empires went to war because of a beautiful woman. Now, this is not an exception. If you look through history, men have given up half their kingdoms, half their wealth for youth and beauty. So, a woman, the younger she is, the more valuable she is, and therefore her price is the highest. But what you find is that, unlike a man who goes through life gaining value, you get the reverse, because like buildings, you have depreciation, you have dilapidation, and anything that is a finite, you might say finite production, or anything that is mass produced, the demand supply dynamics, the law of demand and supply will play its part. Every day, every hour, there's a new woman born. There's a new girl turning 18, joining the cohorts of attractive women, and therefore, like a commodity, the demand is increasing, the supply is also increasing. So, because generally speaking, we are objects, men are objects, women are objects, we are simply animated objects, as opposed to a table that is an inanimate object. But we as men are resource objects and women are sexual objects or reproduction objects. From a man's perspective, what men value: youth, beauty, chastity, purity. So the younger the woman is, the more she has more of what men want. The younger the man is, the less he has more of what women want, which is resources and the ability to provide, protect, and nurture. Provide, protect, and profess. So what you have is this meeting of minds where the needs of both parties are different. But because we're human beings, every day we are dying. And therefore our value from an age perspective starts to go down, and therefore from a beauty perspective starts to go down. Both men and women. The big difference is men do not choose. Other men, generally speaking, they choose women. And what they want is youth. The woman has more of her youth, early days. Women, on the other hand, choose men. What they want is not necessarily age or beauty or youth. What they really want is resources and the ability to meet their needs. Therefore, both parties are choosing based on different criteria. A long explanation, the point being, at a young age, men have a sense of their price in the marketplace and therefore their value. And most men are not conceited. They are generally quite aware of where they stand. Women, on the other hand, unfortunately, have an overpricing of who they are. Their sexual marketplace value is what it is. It is the highest the younger she is. But her price is way overinflated. So you can see a woman who is 20 or 18, just turned an adult. She can walk into a bank and the CEO of the bank can come down and invite her to a party where perhaps the top shareholders of the bank or of the business, who are all, say, millionaires and billionaires, are having an annual get-together. Her beauty is her currency. That beauty, 18, knows nothing, has had no life experience, has just come off the press into being an adult, therefore adult age-wise, 0, but she's allowed into a banquet of the most resourceful, successful men in the country. Now, she can only do that because of her beauty and her youth. Hence, there is an overinflation of a woman's price. Why? Because all men want the same woman. So she walks around thinking, I'm all that, without understanding, well, no, men are judging based on what they find attractive. And that a lot of the other qualities that she needs have not developed yet. That's the first. I talked about pricing. Let me move quickly, because the next point then will be, in a marketplace, some properties are undervalued, some are rightly valued, and some are overvalued. Most women overvalue themselves. Also in a marketplace, some properties are desirable, positioned in locations where people would want to be there, and most people would want to be there. And there are other properties that are in less desirable locations and where a fewer number of people will want to live there. So what you find is, if you walk down the street, on the same street, think about the street you live in. Start from the start of the street to the end. And as you walk down, look at the houses. automatically what you find is that you start to place the properties into a ranking. Oh, that property is the most attractive, is the most maintained. That property is the most attractive architecturally. That property has the best landscape. That other property, not so much, is dilapidated. You then get a score. Same street, different properties, different landscapes, different adjacencies. You get a score. That gets a 10, that gets a 7, that gets a 5, that gets a 4. Women have the same experience. Men have the same experience. From a resource perspective, we rank ourselves. Some men are a 10, some are a 7, some are a 5, and some are a 1. Women, from a sexual marketplace perspective, beauty and attractiveness and fitness, size, you get a score 10, 9, 8, all the way down to about 3. From 3 and below, it means you're unattractive to the point where no one desires to have you around. In addition to that, connected to her age, there is a ranking. A woman who is 45 and therefore starting menopause, who is single, does not have the same ranking as a woman who is 22, who is also single. From a reproductive perspective, what I call your RFV, reproductive fertility value, to men who want to have children and are in the marketplace looking for children, assuming the man is 52. To him, the woman who is 45 has a lower value than the woman who is 22. Why? Because there is a line we call high-risk pregnancy, geriatric pregnancy, 35 going into 36. So at the end of 35, from 36 onwards, high risk. So to the man who is 52 who wants to reproduce and have a child, who has never had a child before, he would rank the 45-year-old woman as having a reproductive fertility value of a 0. There is still maybe a 0.1 or 0.7. There's a possibility that something could come through, but the likelihood is very little, because she's gone way past geriatric pregnancy, and even doctors will tell the woman in question not to get pregnant because there is a risk to her life and the child's well-being from a long-term perspective. The younger woman might score a 10. We all get scored. So, within the topic of whether you were trained and prepared for relationships, the first question is, do you know what your value is? Do you know what your prize is? But more importantly, do you know where you rank amongst your peers, amongst other women? By location, by nation, by, you might even say, proximity. Now, the first question to answer would be, what is my ranking? Here is a mistake most women make. They ask the question, where do I rank based on what I think and what I feel? In order to have successful relationships with the opposite sex, you have to look from the opposite sex's perspective. So I have found most women rank themselves very highly, again, overpriced, the bubble economy, and they give themselves very, very generous rankings. Let me put it to you this way. I've never met a woman who considered herself to be 5 or below. Now recognize that if you look at a normal distribution, the majority of people fall within the average. You slice out the left and you slice out the right, and that is the bulk of the population. The very attractive people generally will make up no more than 10% of 100%. And the very unattractive people will make up about 10% of the total 100%. You take out the 10%, and then you have 80%, the normal distribution. Most people fall within the average range, 5. I have never met a woman who would place themselves in that average category. The question, however, is, what do you rank from a man's perspective? This means that you have to use the criteria the men use when we judge women. That's the second part of today's session. I'm not going to go into the detail of how you should think like a man in coming up with your ranking, but it is very important. Otherwise, what you find is women begin with a ranking of perhaps a 9 at 21, 22, 18, 19, but they believe that they maintain that ranking when they're 32 and single. It's not possible. It's absolutely not possible, because there is nothing on earth that, in this particular case, is exposed to deterioration or dilapidation or aging, the aging process, but that is also being used on a daily basis and increases its value or maintains its value over seasons, days, months, and therefore time. Impossible. Properties, cars, and anything that has a finite life depreciates. So what you find is that women give themselves the same level of value that they experienced in their 20s, and they maintain that into their 40s and 50s. And men, on the other hand, who are the ones judging objectively, are saying, this is crazy. Now, let me conclude with the third aspect of today's conversation, which is your presence. We all have an aura, a spiritual presence, and one of the questions to ask yourself should be, where do I rank in my spiritual presence? There's a key word that can help you come to that conclusion. The word is peace. Every woman has a ranking in terms of her peaceful nature and presence. Men have the same. There are men who, if you were around them for more than 2 hours, you will feel agitated because they are constantly unable to calm themselves down. There's always trouble, there's always drama, there's always negative energy, and therefore you find actually you, the woman, you are stressed. The same thing applies and happens with the opposite sex. There are some women who come into an environment and the environment changes immediately. It goes from having an aroma, a fragrance of peace and serenity, to one that has an odor of battle, fight, negativity. In other words, a quarrelsome woman. So here is the question to you and for you. How do you rank yourself on the scale of your presence and peace from 0 to 10? And once you've given yourself a score, change the question up and say, how do men who have experienced you rank you? And I'm not referring to how they experience you in the bedroom. I'm talking about how they experience you outside of the bedroom. Your work colleagues will tell you, especially the men, how they experience you, whether they like having you around, whether you have a peaceful demeanor, whether you have a serene atmosphere, whether you have a presence that is inspirational, whether you have a muse-like effect. In other words, you walk into the space and suddenly the men get an extra 10% energy, or whether you walk into a space and they're drained. The people in your relationships and the people you've been in relationships with in the past can also answer that question. So, the question you can ask, where do I rank in peace and presence from a man's perspective? That will give you an indication of whether you will be able to have a long-term relationship with a man. Now, for the short term, men will tolerate whatever they need to in order to gain what they want from dating in the long run. The woman retains the man not based on her appearance only, but more based on her behavior, how she communicates, and therefore her peace and her presence. Attraction is the first step. Retention for the woman is the most important step. Now, I hope these three things give you cause to think about relationships. Again, in summary, your value and the price in the marketplace, your ranking according to men, and your presence and your peace. In the next session, I'm going to start taking these parts into consideration and perhaps spend more time so I can expand on some of the things that a woman can do to get the results she wants. But here is what's fascinating. Everything I have talked about today, if you invert the conversation, you get the same formula for the men with some subtle corrections. Now I hope that this has been useful.